Van Morrison's breakthrough single came in a session where his own band was essentially pushed aside. What happened in that studio has become the stuff of rock lore, each player with their own version of events. In the end, a legendary single emerged along with two future rock giants. You can decide for yourself what really went down and the effect, if any, it left on the band. The story begins back in 1964 London at Decca Records when Van Morrison's band Them went in to record their first single, Baby Please Don't Go.
Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go down in New Orleans, you know I love you so.
But who actually played on the track and to what extent has never fully been settled. 19-year-old Van Morrison was there, along with the group's core members, but contradictory stories have long circulated about which band members played and which session musicians played, not just by the fans, but by the musicians themselves. Baby Please Don't Go is considered one of the songs that shaped rock and roll, so whoever gets credit will forever be linked to that recognition. More on that shortly.
Why in Holland especially, Them got such a big name, and I believe it is not such a big name in England.
Well, it was a big name in England about 2 years ago, but if you in England, if you don't have a record in the top 20, you're not so popular. You must have a record in the charts in England.
And we heard some thing you were in the monastery sometime. Is it true?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Why?
Because I was completely sick of the pop scene, and I just wanted to get away from it all because it was getting too much, you know. So it's so false. The pop scene is false, you know. It's not real.
The official lineup was there: guitarist Billy Harrison, bassist Alan Henderson, drummer Ronnie Millings, and keyboard player Eric Rickson, along with Van Morrison. While they were there recording, one by one session players began to appear and sat right next to each band member playing their part alongside them. But why? Session musicians were brought in largely for money and efficiency. Studio time was expensive, and rookie bands like Them could take hours or even days to get a track good enough to release on a record, while seasoned players could step in and nail it in just a few takes. Producers like Dick Rowe also had their reputations on the line. A flop would reflect badly on them, and many band members, while brilliant live, were self-taught and unpredictable in the studio. Using session players ensured the record would be polished and radio ready, while giving the label the sound it wanted to sell. In many cases, the look and the attitude of the band mattered more than who actually played on the record, and hiring professionals guaranteed that the single would be commercially viable. Decca producer Dick Rowe, overseeing A&R singles, ultimately made the call. He's famously known for being the one who turned down the Beatles after their Decca audition, citing guitar bands are on their way out, although he did deny that he said that. He was later dubbed the man with the golden ear after discovering acts such as the Rolling Stones, Tom Jones, Cat Stevens, the Moody Blues, Procol Harum, and the Animals. In the studio that night, session members geared up to play the parts, creating a tense dynamic as resentment from the band mounted with each take. Bobby Graham, one of London's most in-demand drummers, is on a second drum kit. Unconfirmed was Peter Barden on organ and Pat McCauley on keyboard. But it was a young session guitarist who entered the studio that day whose part would be that of debate for years to come. When a 20-year-old Jimmy Page walked in that day, he was the most in-demand session player in England. Many bands would even hold off on recording until he became available. Jimmy had already played on hits like Diamonds by Jet Harris and Tony Meehan in '63. The song reached number 1 in the UK. And The Crying Game by Dave Barry in '64, which reached number 5 in the UK. Page provided guitar work and it became one of Barry's biggest hits.
I know all there is to know about the crying game.
Dave Barry discusses how in demand Jimmy was.
The first time I came in contact with Jimmy Page was on some of my first sessions, and Jimmy Page, Big Jim Sullivan, John Paul Jones were on sort of, I would say, most of my early recordings over a period of 2 years. And he was such an impressive guitarist at 19 that even ourselves, as pretty new to the business, we would wait until that session crew were available You know, my manager would call and say, we booked you in at Decca for a particular session, but we're going to delay it for 3 weeks until that team is ready. I mean, the sessions then were sort of 3-hour sessions, and you had to get the tracks down in that time. And I learned a lot from that aspect of being a musician, you know, not to be too bigoted and, you know, narrow-minded, to be able to adapt and listen to all different types of music. And so he was a terrific player and taught me to listen to other music.
The most enduring point of the Baby Please Don't Go debate, however, centers on Jimmy Page's contribution. Officially, he played rhythm guitar and dubbed the bass riff, but stories persist that he may have also played lead riff that defined the record. Here is Van Morrison's take on the session. Jimmy played on everything then. He played rhythm on Here Comes the Night, and on Baby Please Don't Go, he's playing a detuned 6-string, so he's actually doubling the bass part. Then when it drops down low, he's playing the thing behind the vocal. It's a tuned down guitar, but it sounds like a bass. I loved it. However, the session drummer from that night remembers the night a little differently, describing the session as fantastic despite initial friction with lead singer Van Morrison, who was initially resistant to the use of studio musicians. Graham recalled the producer Alan Greenslade calming Morrison down by telling him the session players were there to help the band. He says, I remember Jimmy Page, Jim Sullivan, and myself being booked to do a session at Decca for the Irish band Them. When we got there, their lead vocalist Van Morrison was really hostile, as he didn't want session men on his recordings. I remember Arthur Greenslade telling him to calm down and saying, look, they're only here to help you. He calmed down, but I think he didn't like it. And apparently none of them were very happy at all about having session players there to play their parts. Jimmy Page explains the intensity of the session.
This time, there was a group and myself and a drummer. I can't remember who the drummer was now. And bit by bit, as the evening went on, another session musician would appear to be sitting next to the bass player, to be sitting next to the keyboards. And so in the end, you know, it was just sort of Van Morrison, session players, and the group, you know, the session players were just duplicating the group. I mean, and you can imagine the tension. It was just, and you know, these chaps from Ulster, what they must have thought. You know, it was just so embarrassing. You know, you just sort of had to look at the floor and play because they were glaring. And you know, it could have been like an end of a musical career in one evening.
Various articles and biographies have discussed the session, often citing conflicting accounts from those involved. For instance, some sources suggest that Jimmy's guitar work defined the song, while others argue that Billy Harrison's original riff was central, with Page merely enhancing it. These discrepancies highlight the ongoing debate and mystery surrounding the session. Page biographer George Case notes, there is a dispute over whether it's Page-piercing blues line that defines the song, if he only played a run Harrison had already devised, or if Page only backed up Harrison himself. Here is what Billy Harrison had to say. That riff on Baby Please Don't Go was my riff. I created it. We'd been playing that song like that all over Northern Ireland for over 1.5 years before it went on record. Session men were often used simply to save money, but in our case, they just weren't necessary. As far as I'm concerned, we'd proved ourselves.
Oh, baby, please don't go down and you won't lynch, you know, love. So, baby, please don't go.
So did having session players cause insecurities with the band? Maybe, although it was very common at the time. But many young artists have deep fears of inadequacy. It understandably hits on a very human insecurity. The dread that your work or even your relationships could be taken away and given to someone better, which is at the heart of the tension and the glaring stares that Jimmy spoke of. Decca released Baby Please Don't Go as Them's single on November 6, 1964. It became their first hit, reaching number 10 in the UK singles charts in February 1965. And to add another wrinkle to the story, the B-side of the record was a little throwaway jam called Gloria, written by Van Morrison. What seemed to be something to put on a B-side began to gain traction. Gloria became one of the most covered garage rock anthems of all time, recorded by Shadows of the Night, The Doors, and dozens more. So in one session, Van Morrison cemented himself as one of the most distinctive new voices in rock. Jimmy Page left his fingerprints on a legendary song years before Led Zeppelin, and a casual B-side Gloria became one of the great rock standards of all time. And all this happened in a tense studio environment where them themselves barely got to play. It's one of those moments where the collision of two rising rock giants made one of the many monumental contributions to the rock songbook. The song itself, Baby Please Don't Go, has one of the richest histories in the blues rock canon. The song began as a Delta blues standard, first recorded in 1935 by Big Joe Williams. It was rooted in older African American folk and prison songs, giving it a haunting, pleading quality. From there, the song became a blues staple, covered by artists like Muddy Waters, Lightning Hopkins, and John Lee Hooker. Each put their own spin on it.
See, I be way down here by the rolling forks, you treat me like a dog. Baby, please don't go down to New Orleans, you know I love you so. Now, baby, please don't go back to New Orleans, you know I love you. Don't get you way down here, I make you walk the Lord. Baby, please don't go.
By the late 50s and early 60s, rock and R&B bands picked it up. Them's 1964 version with Van Morrison transformed it into a garage rock anthem, full of upbeat fury and electricity.
Baby, please don't go down to New Orleans, you know I love you so, baby, please don't go.
The Amboy Dukes 67 version with Ted Nugent's band turned it into a heavy psychedelic rocker. AC/DC in 75 blasted out a tight and aggressive hard rock version. Aerosmith in 2004 revived it again with their own swagger. Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, The Doors, Shadows of the Night, and countless bands have all played it live.
I wanted to sing Baby Please Don't Go because I wanted to hear how it sounded.
Through every version, the core remains the same, a raw, pleading blues tune that adapts to whatever style the moment demands.
Man, I'm gone. You know your man, I'm gone down to the county for me, got it.
In the end, Van Morrison, Jimmy Page, and the song Baby Please Don't Go all share a rare quality, the ability to adapt across genres while retaining their own raw intensity.
While your mind's not gone, let the county for me, hear the shackles on, baby, please don't go.